It was the kind of morning where everything feels unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath your skin, like your body knows something before your mind does. Elizabeth stepped out of the black town car, heels clicking with purpose on the marble pavement of the courthouse steps. Her navy blue suit was tailored to perfection, every strand of hair swept into a tight chignon, not a single detail out of place. In her hand was a leather folder, pressed tightly to her chest like armor. She paused just before the double doors and turned her head. Across the plaza, a silver Mercedes pulled up. Out came Richard Matthews, calm, sharp, and annoyingly smug in his charcoal suit. Beside him, holding his arm like they were headed to a gala instead of a divorce hearing, was Ashley, the assistant. 26. Glossy curls, red dress too tight for court but perfect for attention. And heels, far too high for someone who wasn't planning to run from anything. Elizabeth smiled, not kindly. It was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't blink as they walked past her, Richard barely offering a nod. Ashley glanced her way, just for a second, like someone sizing up a rival in a game she thought she'd already won. Elizabeth let them pass, let Richard play out his performance. After all, he was the one who requested this hearing. He was the one who filed for divorce, demanded 70% of the marital assets, and told the world his wife was just a housewife with no career and no claim. She had let him believe that. Let him sit comfortably in his illusions. But today wasn't about comfort. Today was the day Elizabeth Matthews stopped being a shadow. She pushed open the courtroom doors with the kind of calm that terrifies people, the kind that says, "I know something you don't." Because she did. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Attorneys shuffled papers, clerks tapped quietly at keyboards, and somewhere a bailiff cleared his throat like a warning. Elizabeth didn't flinch. She took her seat beside her attorney, Meredith Sloan, a woman known in legal circles as brilliant, ruthless, and never one to be underestimated. Meredith greeted her with a silent nod, eyes already scanning the room like a hawk. Across the aisle, Richard leaned over to whisper something into Ashley's ear, then chuckled like they were seated in a private box at a theater, not a divorce trial. Ashley giggled too loudly, clearly playing her role. Every detail, from her manicured nails to the way she crossed her legs toward Richard, screamed calculated confidence. Elizabeth didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Instead, her mind drifted back to the beginning, not the beginning of the trial, or even the affair, but the day she received the letter. It had come by courier, sealed and impersonal. A simple manila envelope with her name typed in bold. Inside, the papers were crisp, the language cold. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed by Richard J. Matthews. Claiming irreconcilable differences. She remembered standing in the foyer of their lake house, still holding a cup of tea in one hand, reading the first paragraph over and over. No fight. No discussion. Just a legal document delivered to her door like she was some business transaction to be closed out quietly. She didn't cry. Instead, she'd walked over to the fireplace, placed the cup down, and whispered to no one in particular, "So that's how you want to play this." Richard had been in Chicago that week, at least, that's what he told her. She later learned he wasn't alone. A private investigator had confirmed it, dinners, hotel check-ins, even a spa day booked under Ashley's name, billed to their joint account, no less. Elizabeth didn't confront him. She waited. She waited through the weeks of cold dinners, through the half-hearted conversations, through the weekends where he claimed client emergencies but came back smelling like a different life. She watched as he built a fantasy outside their marriage, believing she would quietly dissolve into the background. What he didn't know, what he never even thought to ask, was what she had built in the shadows. 3 years into their marriage, Elizabeth had quietly reinvested her inheritance. Properties. Private equity. Even silent ownership in 3 law firms, one of which just so happened to be Caldwell and Matthews. Richard thought the name was a fluke. It wasn't. He had no idea that the firm he used to impress clients, the one that made him feel untouchable, was owned, majority share, by his own wife. And the best part? Every document proving it had been signed by him. He just never read the fine print. Now, sitting across from him in a room filled with lawyers, clerks, and a judge about to walk in, Elizabeth waited, not for revenge, but for recognition. And maybe, just maybe, for Richard to finally look at her not as the woman he used to know, but the one he never bothered to. Want to know what happens when secrets turn into power? Stay with me, because it's about to get good. The heavy door behind the bench creaked open, and silence dropped over the room like a curtain. Everyone rose as Judge Harwood entered, stern, meticulous, and notoriously allergic to theatrics. He gave a curt nod and motioned for everyone to sit. Elizabeth settled back into her chair, her spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across the aisle, Richard leaned forward, as if eager to seize control of the narrative before it could slip from his grip. Your Honor, his attorney began smoothly, Mr. Matthews has been the primary financial provider throughout this 12-year marriage. My client seeks a fair division of assets that reflects his contributions and responsibilities. We are requesting 70% of marital assets, with Mrs. Matthews receiving 30%, in recognition of her role as a non-working spouse. Elizabeth's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. Meredith gently placed a hand over her wrist, a subtle signal. Wait. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Matthews, your counsel has a response? Meredith rose slowly, placing a slim folder on the table before stepping forward. Her voice, cool and precise, filled the courtroom like a blade sliding from a sheath. Your Honor, we not only object to the proposed division, but we believe there has been a critical omission in Mr. Matthews' presentation of the marital dynamic. We are prepared to submit documentation proving that Mrs. Matthews is, in fact, the majority shareholder in Caldwell and Matthews, a firm Mr. Matthews claims to have built alone. A ripple passed through the courtroom. Even Judge Harwood leaned back slightly. Richard's head snapped toward Elizabeth. What the hell is this? He hissed. Meredith continued, unbothered. Mrs. Matthews has held controlling interest in the firm for the past 9 years, under the legal entity Winters Equity Holdings. All shares were acquired using separate, premarital assets. We have contracts signed by Mr. Matthews himself, standard internal compliance forms he clearly never read. We have bank statements, corporate filings, and documentation showing that Mrs. Matthews provided the capital that allowed Caldwell and Matthews to expand during the 2016 merger. Richard stood up, face reddening. That's not true. That's not. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Matthews, you will sit down or be held in contempt. Richard slowly dropped back into his seat, but his eyes never left Elizabeth. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitching on the table. Marcus Weber, Richard's longtime partner and co-founder, had been sitting in the back of the courtroom. Now, he stood and addressed the judge with visible discomfort. Your Honor, if I may. I can confirm that the documents appear legitimate. The shares were acquired quietly but legally. While I was unaware of the full extent of Mrs. Matthews' ownership, I can attest that our internal records match the filings submitted here. The judge nodded, turning his gaze toward Richard. Mr. Matthews, do you wish to revise your position on the division of assets? Richard looked like a man who had just realized the floor beneath him was hollow. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Elizabeth finally spoke, softly, clearly, and without a trace of gloating. You wanted to reduce me to a number. A percentage. A role you thought I was playing. But the truth is, Richard, while you were building your image, I was building a foundation. And it's one you've been standing on without knowing it. The judge cleared his throat. We will recess for 15 minutes. Counsel, use this time to consider whether you'd like to proceed or negotiate terms more reasonably. As the room emptied in a quiet storm of whispers, Elizabeth stayed seated. Her eyes didn't follow Richard as he stumbled out with Ashley trailing behind him. She had no interest in watching him unravel. Because this wasn't about destroying him. It was about reclaiming herself. The hallway outside the courtroom echoed with hurried footsteps and hushed, frantic voices. Richard paced like a man being chased by ghosts. Ashley stood nearby, arms folded tightly across her chest, her face pale beneath layers of carefully applied makeup. "I don't understand," she whispered, glancing toward the courtroom doors. "You told me she didn't have anything. You said she never worked, never even opened a bank account." "I didn't know," Richard snapped, running a hand through his hair. I didn't think she'd do something like this." Ashley's jaw dropped slightly. "You didn't think? You brought me into this courtroom like we were on a victory tour. You told me it was handled." Richard turned away, unable to meet her eyes. His world, built on certainty and image, was crumbling in real time. The smugness that had carried him through most of his career had vanished, replaced with something brittle and raw. Meanwhile, Elizabeth remained inside the courtroom, alone with Meredith, quietly reviewing documents. She wasn't gloating. Her expression was still, almost serene, like someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment and now had nothing left to fear. 15 minutes passed like water slipping through stone. Then came a knock at the side door. It was Marcus Weber. He entered with a look that was both sheepish and stunned. "Elizabeth," he said, nodding respectfully. "May I have a word, in private?" Meredith glanced at Elizabeth, who gave a calm nod. The judge had yet to return, and the room was quiet. Outside, in a narrow conference room, Marcus spoke first. "In all my years of legal work, I've never seen someone play this long game so flawlessly," he said. "And I've known you for over a decade, yet I never suspected." Elizabeth didn't smile. "That was the point." He nodded. "Look, Richard's shaken. Completely. He wants to settle. 50-50 split of the marital assets, full acknowledgement that the firm and all its subsidiaries remain solely in your name. He's agreed to walk away with no further claims." Elizabeth tilted her head. "He's ready to give up his career?" Marcus exhaled. "He doesn't really have a choice. After this? Everyone in the firm knows now. Half the partners are already whispering. Some are impressed. Others? They're questioning how he didn't see it coming. Either way, his credibility has taken a serious hit." There was a long pause. "I don't want to ruin him," Elizabeth said finally. "I just don't want him pretending he built an empire by himself when he barely saw the scaffolding being raised." Marcus leaned forward. "You still want to stay on as majority owner?" "I do," she replied. "But I won't micromanage. I'm appointing Patricia Reynolds as managing partner. She's been overlooked for years. That ends now." Marcus blinked. "That's unexpected. But honestly? A smart move." They shook hands. Respectfully. Professionally. As Marcus stepped out, another figure appeared in the hallway, hesitant, quiet. "Ashley." She looked nervous, but not defensive. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, voice lower than Elizabeth had ever heard it. Elizabeth considered saying no. But she nodded. They stepped into the now empty courtroom. Ashley didn't sit. She just stood, arms stiff at her sides. "I didn't know," she began. "About the firm. About you. About any of it." Elizabeth nodded. "That makes two of us." Ashley flinched, then collected herself. "I know you probably think I'm some gold-digging stereotype. But I actually believed him. He said the marriage was dead. That you were cold, controlling, emotionally distant. I guess I wanted to believe it." "I'm sure he made it easy," Elizabeth said softly. Ashley's eyes shimmered with something close to guilt. "He said he left because he wanted someone who supported his ambition. But now I'm wondering if he just wanted someone who wouldn't question it." Elizabeth walked slowly toward her, measured, poised. "He didn't leave because he found something better. He left because I stopped making it easy to lie to himself." Ashley looked down, embarrassed. You should know, Elizabeth continued, he's done this before. You're not the first. Convenient escape hatch. Ashley's eyes widened. Her name was Caroline, Elizabeth said. 2 years before me. Engagement ended after she got promoted and started making more than him. He called her distracted. She called him insecure. You can imagine how that ended. Silence. Elizabeth took a breath. You're young. You still have time to decide who you want to be, and whether that includes being someone's alibi. Ashley blinked fast, fighting something behind her eyes. Then she nodded and quietly walked away. Elizabeth stood alone in the echo of the courtroom. The same room where Richard once boasted to colleagues, where his voice had filled the walls. Now, it was her voice that lingered. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a background character in her own life. The courtroom felt different now. Not physically, same worn wooden benches, same polished floor, same austere paintings of forgotten judges staring down from the walls. But something fundamental had shifted. The air was quieter. Heavier. The energy in the room no longer belonged to Richard. Elizabeth walked in with measured grace, a calm certainty radiating from her. Meredith followed closely behind, briefcase in hand but barely needed now. Everything that mattered had already been said. Richard was already seated at his table, a shell of the man who'd started into the courtroom just hours earlier. His tie was loosened, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller. Not just humbled, but unmasked. Judge Harwood returned to the bench. I understand the parties have reached a settlement, he asked, glancing first to Meredith, then Richard's lawyer. Meredith stood. Yes, Your Honor. Both parties have agreed to an equal division of marital assets. Mrs. Matthews will retain full and exclusive ownership of Caldwell and Matthews and all related entities. Mr. Matthews will waive any claims to said assets moving forward. The judge gave a single nod. Very well. I find the terms fair and equitable. The divorce is granted, effective immediately. There was a pause. Not legal, but human. Richard stood. Your Honor, may I say something? The courtroom tensed. Judge Harwood raised an eyebrow. Briefly. Richard turned, not to the judge, not to the room, but to Elizabeth. I want to say I'm sorry, he began, voice rough and low. Not just for the affair, or for the lies, or the way I left things. But for underestimating you. For thinking I was the only one building something when the truth is, I never even saw the ground beneath me. Elizabeth held his gaze, steady and unflinching. You deserved better, he said. I just didn't know how to be the kind of man who could recognize it. There was silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that settles when something real is finally said aloud. Elizabeth stood. I appreciate the apology, she replied. But I don't need it to move forward. She turned to the judge. We have nothing else to add. Papers were signed. The gavel fell. And just like that, 12 years dissolved into signatures and silence. Afterward, outside in the courtyard, Richard approached her one last time. I keep thinking, he said quietly, if you had told me about the company, about your investments, maybe things would have been different. Elizabeth tilted her head, considering. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I'd still be the woman adjusting herself to make you feel tall. He looked away. She continued, softer now. I didn't hide those things out of malice. I hid them because, deep down, I knew you weren't ready to see me fully. And maybe I wasn't ready to be fully seen. He gave a faint nod. Do you think we could have made it, if we'd both been more honest? Elizabeth smiled, gently. Maybe we could have. But that's not the story we lived. They stood in silence for a moment, two people who had built something together, then broken it apart. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Elizabeth. She turned and walked away, not out of anger, not out of triumph, but out of completion. Nothing left to explain. Nothing left to lose. That night, she slept without waking. No lingering thoughts. No rehearsed arguments. Just quiet. What would it feel like to finally stop carrying someone else's expectations? To be done, not with heartbreak, but with pretending? 1 year later, the glass walls of the Winter Capitol office gleamed beneath the morning sun, perched 32 floors above the city. The skyline stretched wide and endless, just like her life now. Elizabeth stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the people below move like tiny pieces in a game she no longer played. Her suit was slate gray, her heels grounded, her expression calm. She looked like a woman who had always been in charge, even though the world had only recently started noticing. Her assistant, Clara, entered the room with a gentle knock. "Your 10 a.m. with Williams Business Quarterly is here," she said. "They'd like to talk about your journey." Again. Elizabeth smiled. "Let them. Just make sure they spell my name right this time." The article would run under the title, "The Silent Partner Who Owned It All." It would cover the collapse of her marriage, the courtroom reveal, the quiet empire she had spent over a decade building. And though Elizabeth had never chased headlines, she didn't shy away from the spotlight anymore. Because now, it served a purpose. She had restructured every one of her holdings under a single umbrella, Winter Capital, a firm that invested in women-led businesses, ethical law firms, and initiatives designed to remove the barriers she once faced. She wasn't just reclaiming space. She was clearing paths. At Caldwell and Matthews, Patricia Reynolds had officially become managing partner. Under Elizabeth's silent guidance, the firm had not only survived the scandal, it had flourished. And Richard? He'd taken a job at a boutique practice in the suburbs, far from the prestige he once wielded so carelessly. They hadn't spoken since the final papers were signed, though they occasionally crossed paths at legal events. The last time, he'd sent a drink to her table with a napkin that read, "Still learning." She had smiled, but hadn't replied. On this particular morning, an invitation arrived on her desk, thick cardstock, embossed edges. "Breener and Walsh proudly invites you to the grand opening of our new downtown office. Keynote address by Richard J. Matthews." Clara raised an eyebrow when she saw it. "You going?" Elizabeth shrugged. "Why not? I'm curious to see if he learned anything worth sharing." That evening, she arrived fashionably late. The room was filled with sharp suits and sharper smiles. Richard stood at the podium, delivering polished lines about resilience, failure, and starting over. He didn't mention her by name, but his pauses said enough. After the speech, they crossed paths near the bar. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "I like watching people graduate from their mistakes," she replied, sipping her wine. He chuckled. "I heard about the investment fund. And Patricia. Smart move." Elizabeth nodded. "I'm just happy you finally learned to read the fine print." He laughed softly. "Touché." They parted without promises, without old wounds reopened. Just mutual understanding. Later that night, alone in her apartment, Elizabeth stood in front of her mirror, not to check for flaws, but to acknowledge herself. The woman staring back wasn't someone's wife, someone's support system, someone's shadow. She was Elizabeth Winters. Unhidden. Unapologetic. Whole. And for the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for the next chapter. She was writing it. If you've ever lost yourself in someone else's story, only to find your way back stronger, tell us in the comments. And if you felt something from Elizabeth's journey, don't forget to subscribe. Because next week, we're bringing you a brand new tale of power, redemption, and the woman who wouldn't be erased. And just like that, she walked out of court not as someone's ex-wife, but as the silent power behind it all. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply revealed the truth, and watched everything shift in her favor. Now it's your turn. What do you think of Elizabeth's final move? Was it cold? Was it brilliant? Was it justified? Tell us in the comments. Comment 2 if you think she was right. Comment 7 if you think she went too far. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to True Tales. Because next week's story? It might just be even wilder.